Knuckles Comic Issue 5. At the start of this issue, I actually thought the echidna in the white robe was Knuckles, because he looked so short from the perspective he was drawn in, so that was confusing. The next few panels are basically the same art over and over, but with it changing the speech of the echidna reading a kid's book in giant text. But I have no problem with this, because looking at it in a video, this just makes it look like a movie or TV show. It makes sense that there wouldn't be much movement in the scene, they're both being still. So with it looking more like a movie, it feels more immersive, I guess. Anyways, Knuckles' father says at first that he can imagine what she must be saying, avoiding "as you know." And then his friend on the armchair says that he doubts that, because he personally knows Lara Lee well. Then we cut to Knuckles and Julie being brought into a building, being escorted by some cops. And they're both complaining about how they don't even know why they're being brought in. Isn't it a law that police are supposed to tell you why they're arresting you? Is this a dictatorship? So Constable Remington takes the two of them into the briefing room, while showing respect for Knuckles for being a guardian. Wait, huh? But in this particular point in time, the echidna polis they're in, aren't they at the time of the white meteor? Long before they would ever have a chaos chamber to be guarded? Is he just respecting his job without knowing anything? Constable opens up some trap doors below Knuckles and Julie, saying that there's someone most anxious to see Knuckles, while still acting genuinely overly respectful. I guess he's only letting Julie come with him because he assumes he'd want that, since I doubt that anxious person wanted to see her. Still, I'm very confused. Meanwhile, we see an earthquake in the city and the civilians scream at seeing the ghostly shape of dingoes all around them. And we're then shown the dingoes' perspective, with the echidnas being faded, and they're asking why echidnas are all around them. Clearly these dingoes must be from outside of this place. One of the dingoes, they both seem to be army men, says that where echidnas are involved is always a matter of top priority. Even though you'd think he wouldn't have a priority or whatever for echidnas, since at his time there's so little of them. Then the guy tries to warn his general, even though he was in Echidnapolis. And this confused me enough to go back a few pages multiple times. Did he get sent out of Echidnapolis and warped to the general's home or whatever, so he could immediately run to the general's office? The general explains that he's seen the appearing but not there echidnas as well, and he shows racism against the echidnas by calling them cursed and insulting them for experiments, as if they still have a reputation as scientific experimenters even in modern times, and by saying that echidnas seem to think that only their affairs matter. Well, that last one is kinda true, with that one echidna that said it's the end of the world and only Echidnapolis being in danger. After the general makes plans against the echidnas, Knuckles is shocked at finding an old relative of his in a wheelchair who says that he's a guardian too. But why though? In Echidnapolis at this point in time, they didn't have a chaos chamber because their island wasn't floating yet, let alone have guardians. And why would this guy know Knuckles already when Knuckles at this point in time hasn't even been born yet? Can someone please explain to me what's going on? I guess the first time Knuckles came in here that the city was some sort of virtual reality simulation, and that's the only explanation to all the discrepancies I can think of. At the very least, they try to make sense by the relative saying he's Knuckles' great-grandfather 7 generations removed, because if he was just his grandfather, then Knuckles would be pretty old. He then says that the fact that Knuckles is here means that something's very wrong. When Knuckles asks where they are, being a great audience surrogate and showing self-awareness by the writing by saying, "I don't understand any of this." Well, his great 7 times grandfather says that this place should have remained a memory for Knuckles at best. So I guess he is originally from this time? I really wish they had confirmed that in Sonic Adventure, because it would have explained why he says that the Echidna Village feels familiar, and why in the Chow Garden he has an idle line that the place feels familiar. Knuckles gets brought into his inner sanctum, and is told to push the green button on that panel and gently remove the oblong box inside the compartment. It has a set of discs in it, and Knuckles is told to remove the first one and slide it into the saw on that console next to him, because I guess his great-grandfather is too lazy to do all this himself. By the way, why does Knuckles know what discs are? He was raised without technology and told to hate it irrationally. I'm guessing Rotor or the Chaotix did a lot to get him up to speed. These discs contain the logs of him made during his tenure as Guardian almost 200 years ago. And he remarks that he of course looked younger back then. Wait, so this guy's actually lived to be that old? Echidnas really are magical beings. The log entry shows a video saying that this is the 5th storage depot he's discovered was broken into. But that time, the looters didn't have much of a head start, and he attacks them as they're trying to drive away in trucks, sending one of the trucks exploding. By the way, this is just static video footage made from convenient cameras. How are we getting all of these fancy camera shots with zoom in and everything? This scene would have required multiple cameras and editing together. I guess that's how it happened? I guess this was a little project of his. He explains that from the way the truck exploded, it was obvious that the dingoes in them were carrying explosives in them. Now we finally get a good explanation for the war general and his hatred of the echidnas. The dingoes and echidnas have been at war even before there was a floating island. Wait, hold up. I thought Knuckles was at the time of the white meteor. So the guy he's talking to knows ahead of time that there will be a floating island? Is he psychic? Knuckles compliments how he was handling the situation. Like I'd imagine of a child showing admiration for his grandpa telling war stories. It's really endearing of him, and since he never had relatives like this as a kid, it makes sense that he'd regress and handle them like a kid would. His 7 times great-grandpa explains that the dingoes were warlike because that was how they had survived. And after Knuckles says that they were handling echidna technology pretty well, he's told that they could only copy and adapt what they had learned from others. The dingoes had never stopped to think about what they would do with the technology once they stole it, and the results nearly proved catastrophic for everyone when they used it against them. So did they steal a nuclear bomb? When they activated weaponry not used in hundreds of years, making me wonder why it wasn't just dismantled for scrap metal then. Some drastic consequences were threatening people. A log explains that we have determined that unless we use the same technology being used against us to defend ourselves, we are doomed. First, the R there is stilted. It should have been we're doomed. But what I really want to do is compliment how unintrusive these past flashbacks are, because here, they're completely justified right from the start in universe. They're camera footage. Sadly, we aren't told who the hell his great-grandpa was talking to in the footage, being told that it wasn't important. And suddenly, Archimedes tells Knuckles to shush and pay attention. Oh, right, I totally forgot he was with Knuckles. Also, where's Julie? Why bother putting her through the trap door then? Anyways, the old guy explains that he returned to a site that had been sealed since the time of Edmund. Okay, so this guy is a time traveler from the future, apparently. Because remember, the people in Echidnapolis recently were panicking over the end of the world. We're not in past Edmund times here. But he's saying that his people were being forced to use technology after they had banned it. And Knuckles isn't even questioning the chronology of this. We see his great-grandpa 7 times warding off nuclear missiles with the energy shields reflecting the nuclear debris. But sadly, not even the energy shields could contain the radioactive dust that carried in the winds spreading throughout the floating island. Since the entire island was affected, evacuation was out of the question. But he had discovered a possible option among Dimitri's papers which weren't burned for some reason from being, from Dimitri. He had theorized the existence of other zones, which occupied the same space, but were operating at different vibrational speeds. Oh, I guess that's the explanation for why zones can exist within zones, like the detective film noir zone on Mobius. That's pretty fascinating. Different vibrational speeds. Then he explains that he designed and built a special invention because I guess the Guardians kept on learning about how to be science wizards up to his point. The Hyper Zone Projector. They would use it to transport Echidnapolis and its citizens to the safe environment of another zone temporarily until the radioactive waste would be cleaned up. Okay, so if this didn't convince the echidnas that technology was good, I want to punch something. He explains that because of his sense of responsibility to everyone on the island, he even helped the dingoes, who would be transported to a zone of safety, albeit one different from theirs, or anyone else's. That makes sense. Although, it makes the dingoes look very ungrateful for still hating the echidnas even after they saved their lives. It also explains why the dingoes were still fighting with them even after the island was floating upwards. I guess they didn't just bring the city upwards, but a bunch of free building space around the city as well. That's smart. And a nice touch of realism rather than patronizing the audience, He explains that it took well over a century before Angel Island was restored back to the way it once was and the first inhabitants were returned to their home. Knuckles then raises a surprising question. How come, from what I can see, you restored everything but the echidnas? His grandpa then adds, and the dingoes, who have yet to deal with them. He explains to him that he didn't have an energy source great enough to send back either city. Even though I'm sure he had a Chaos Emerald in the Chaos Chamber, and one Chaos Emerald is supposed to have an infinite amount of power, remember? How is it not a great enough energy source? But yeah, apparently it was all he could do just on a piecemeal basis. What does he mean? He just sent back the inhabitants and not the cities? First off, I thought they blew up the city of Echidnapolis. So what city? And second, Knuckles just said he didn't restore the echidnas. His 7 times great-grandpa then goes away in his chair, but fortunately before I can get really mad at leaving me on a cliffhanger when I was fully invested in the exposition of the lore, and he continues, showing Knuckles a statue showing 2 echidnas holding up Angel Island, and says that this statue is symbolic of Knuckles' responsibility as a guardian. Knuckles naturally begs him for more answers, and is told that for reasons that can't be revealed yet, he is the most special out of all the guardians. I assume because he's the most powerful. And you're not ready for it. He tells Knuckles that the best thing he can do for now is the same thing that every guardian has done at his stage of development, which is listen. Then an earthquake happens, interrupting him as I'm still confused, and a red alarm goes off. The constable tells Julie that she had been kept here for security reasons. Wait, she clearly fell down the trapdoor with Knuckles. Okay, I guess they retconned that within the same issue and forgot to change the art. This does make more sense anyways. Constable tells Julie that he needs her help with a dingo attack that had taken hostages at a housing complex on the east side. Julie serves as the perfect audience surrogate by saying exactly what I'm thinking, by questioning why they need her. She's told that because she was with Knuckles, a guardian, she's going to accompany him as his representative. For some reason, she isn't very happy with this. The constable at least explains logically that we don't normally stand on ceremony, which makes more sense when dealing with someone they're warring with. Then he explains that in this case, among the hostages are the Lady Lara Lee and her consort. And Julie reveals, isn't that Knuckles' mother? He explains that he's well aware of that, and in past dealings with the Guardians' families, he's learned that it's best to have someone with them to consult with. Julie, now wearing a helmet in a vehicle, says, "You make them sound like they're royalty." And he says that they sort of are, although they're usually told to just defer to the High Council. I like Knuckles basically being from royalty. He is a main character after all, so I feel like he deserves to come from an important family like that. Huh? When Julie tells the constable that they're pretty well prepared for people who renounce technology, instead of being confused because that hasn't happened yet in his time, the constable acknowledges that she's right about this, and explains that them using this technology is just really common sense on the department's part for dealing with the dingoes. Okay, so it looks like the constable really isn't in that time, but instead living in a post-technology time. You know, because that was so obvious. Considering that we saw in the previous issue some civilians panicking about the end of the world, you can't blame me for assuming they were talking about the white meteor. And considering that we were seeing skyscrapers and stuff, which blatantly are technology, you can't blame me for not knowing that this was post-Bannon technology, because the city still looks just as futuristic as ever. So I guess when the echidnas banned technology, they were actually only banishing the modern conveniences like VCRs, TV, and other luxuries, and not technology like police SWAT gear or skyscrapers. Okay, that does make a lot more sense. Except one, it wasn't modern conveniences like VCRs that caused the Dimitri incident. Dimitri used a futuristic invention that most certainly isn't an invention commonly used as a leisure-light luxury by everyone else. That's the kind of technology that I could understand being banned, not harmless TVs. The biggest problem I have is that when they talked about banning technology, not once was it specified that the law was only banning a specific type of technology. If that's what they were going with, and not banning everything including medical technology and air conditioning, I would have appreciated it if the council with Edmund in it had very clearly stated that this was the case. But instead, We have the law being blatantly disobeyed by the police, and by everyone else since they're still living in futuristic looking buildings to the point where Knuckles and Julie didn't notice that they banned technology at all. It makes perfect sense that through common sense, they would ignore some technology bans. It makes the people not look rock stupid. It's just like how people don't follow every single scripture of a religious book, including the most ridiculous ones. I just wish they were honest about this selectiveness from the start, instead of making me wonder why people who still use technology in any way aren't being prosecuted. By the way, you're kind, as well as Dingo's. Does he know she's former Dark Legion, just based on looking at her? I mean, that would explain why she was kept there for security reasons, but why is he trusting her enough to be representative and going with him now? We then cut back to Knuckles asking Archimedes and his 7 times great-grandpa if they're okay after the earthquake. I was getting the feeling that he forgot I was here. I like that Archimedes said that, because I actually did. He's so small is the thing, that he's easy to overlook. His great-grandpa calls himself a wreck. Self-esteem issues, I guess, because he doesn't look injured. And then magically floats out of the wheelchair saying that he can still take care of himself. So I'm guessing that the reason he doesn't just magically float around all the time, not even bother with the wheelchair, is because he would exhaust himself from using magic all the time. The next panel shows him in the wheelchair. Oh, I guess it was showing him getting into it, not out of it. That's still images for you. And the story ends with the TV monitor that I'm confused wasn't banned by the technology ban, showing an image of Knuckles' mother captured as a hostage by a dingo general. This story, written by Ken Penders, is a story of lore and world building. But this time, the flashbacks to the past don't feel jarring at all because they're fully justified in universe as camera footage taken a while ago and shown to Knuckles. And I really enjoyed seeing the lore that was being told. The concepts of how Echidnapolis was fighting wars against the dingoes throughout history, and how they saved the echidnas from nuclear annihilation by using zone teleporting. Problem is, I don't think they made it clear enough the time period in Echidnapolis that Knuckles is in right from the start. Because I spent the whole time confused about why Knuckles' great-grandfather 7 generations removed was talking about a technology ban that didn't look like it had happened. The old guy explained that he only sent the civilians back to the island, couldn't send the city back to the island. But then Knuckles said that he didn't send the echidnas back to the island, so wouldn't they be here? I enjoyed this issue. It was interesting enough. I'm just full of unanswered questions. But I'm sure that was the intent. I'm sure they'll explain a lot of that later. Next up, the 6th issue.